My name is Arnold Zach, and I teach at the Labor and Work-Life program at Harvard Law School. And today we wanted to talk with Tom Kochan, who's a professor at the Sloan School, MIT, on some of the importance of negotiations as a means of resolving conflicts. Tom, there appears to be a growing number of strikes of workers in China that are lasting longer, that are interfering with production and causing a lot of disruption in the country in the last couple of years. Is that something that happens in other countries? And what can firms do to better manage strikes when they occur?
Well, the first thing to understand is that this is a common occurrence across almost all developing economies and highly industrialized economies. Workers and managers naturally have different points of view, and often the strikes that occur, like the ones we're experiencing in China, are really protests by workers trying to get management's attention and asking them to address the issues that are most concerned to them at the workplace. And this is one way for them to focus management on those issues. Now, what we normally see in most countries is you have some rules governing strikes, governing negotiation built into the legal system. And you have independent worker organizations that represent their members in negotiating with management. In China, this is still developing. There are laws providing for individual mediation, individual conflict resolution. The collective disputes are still a bit more ambiguous. The All China Confederation of Trade Unions sometimes plays the role of representative, and sometimes it's just independent worker groups that come along to represent workers. So we need to encourage orderly development of these kinds of processes so that we can deal with the over 30,000 number of disputes that have come along in recent years.
If the Chinese laws do provide for mediation, and they do provide for arbitration, and they've been in place for years, isn't that the way in which these disputes can be resolved, through existing Chinese legislation?
I think the existing legislation is a good base to start from, but it all applies to individual disputes, not to collective disputes. What we're seeing now in China is that groups of workers are coming together to protest their conditions, and so it's up to employers now to fill partly this vacuum by not just trying to suppress those disputes, but working with leaders of the employees, recognizing that they need to develop the skills of negotiations. They've got to legitimize the fact that workers have concerns at the workplace, and they have to reach out to help develop the mediation services and other institutional arrangements that support these kinds of processes. And then finally, as they negotiate these issues, they have to work on how do you build this into an ongoing management system for managing conflicts at the workplace, both individual and collective. So this is really a frontier of management. It's a frontier of management training. It's a frontier of education in universities so that the next generation of managers have these skills. And it's a very exciting opportunity to take this next step in the development in China.
Shouldn't these changes all be geared to the same kinds of, now you have a process for resolving disputes over violation of contract or violation of state laws that affect an individual. Are the disputes that are collective any different from the disputes that we've been dealing with individually in China?
One of the big differences is that we have to have representatives of workers in the collective disputes. As an individual, obviously, an individual speaks for herself or himself and maybe will get some legal support from somewhere. But when you have a collective dispute, the first question is who represents these workers and who gives voice to their concerns and who should management deal with and work with. That's a big issue in China as the process is evolving in some parts of the country. The official trade union, the All China Confederation of Trade Unions, is beginning to take on this role as a representative. But often it's just an informal worker from the workplace himself or herself that begins to speak for workers. And so management has to help develop this capability of representing workers, of legitimizing the fact that they speak for large groups and then use the tools of negotiations, mediation, and other ways of resolving disputes in these kinds of cases.
So you're saying that some of the disputes that are now arising that show group activity are different from the ones of just conforming to the law and the contract. They are problems that the employer deals with and should be concerned with about the operations of the enterprise and how demands might encroach on the employer's heretofore unrestricted operations. And so there should be a system for handling things beyond what is statutory.
As China has evolved to a more mixed free enterprise economy, more of these kinds of issues have come up. Under the older system of state-owned enterprises, there was a closer alignment between employee and employer interests. But now, as in other countries, you're seeing these disputes emerge. They are over the natural concerns for wages, hours, working conditions, safety and health at the workplace, economic security, and so on. And these are disputes that we often refer to as interest disputes, disputes where there is a legitimate difference in interest between the employer and the workforce. And so they simply have to be addressed. Suppressing them just leads to further conflict and the ultimate escalation into often violent outbursts at the workplace. We know from all kinds of experience and evidence that the most productive workplaces, the most effective workplaces, the ones that attract the best quality of workforce are ones that address these questions directly, negotiate them effectively, learn from the experiences, learn to address the underlying problems that give rise to these disputes, and then move on in a more cooperative fashion. That's the goal for China.
So if you were a manager in one of these enterprises, what would you do?
I would make sure that we are legitimizing the voicing of concerns at the workplace. I would put in place internal processes to try to resolve these concerns before they escalate into full-fledged protests. I would make sure that my management colleagues are all well trained in modern negotiations and in modern facilitation of mediation and dispute resolution processes. And I would make sure that the workforce knows that they can bring their concerns to management and they can bring their concerns to the workplace. And I would further take the step of encouraging training of workforce representatives, whether it's the formal trade union or workplace committees, safety and health committees, works councils as they're called in some countries. We need to develop worker representatives who have the skills needed to manage conflicts effectively today.
That's very helpful as a roadmap for the growing Chinese economy, and very helpful. Thank you very much, Professor
Thank
Kochan.
you.